Welcome to the Deep End by On Deck, a podcast where visionary builders, creators, and thinkers discuss world-changing stories and ideas. I'm your host, Marshall Kozlov.
We're still flying around, like idiots at 550 miles an hour when, we had this plane called the Concorde and it flew more than twice as fast as that. And, we don't have it anymore. We completely lost it. And we could be flying, we could be getting to our destination in a fraction of the time that we're getting there today. And we would probably, if that technology were widespread and available and we were able to drive the cost down, that we would all travel more, right? We'd see more of the world in our lifetime and go more often. I think you could go sector by sector through the economy, right? Like health, energy, transportation, et cetera. And I think there's so many possibilities that we could do, and we just need to be more ambitious about it.
On Deck is where ambitious people worldwide go to start companies, find their next roles, and invest in their careers. The Deep End invites the founders, operators, and investors from the On Deck community and beyond to turn their experiences into the ideas others need to start their own odysseys. Before we get into the episode, a quick note from the team at On Deck. If you're looking to break into startups or just want to be more intentional about the next step in your career, applications for the On Deck First 50 Fellowship close today, May 2nd. OD50 helps experienced professionals find mission-aligned roles at high-growth startups through expert-led workshops, one-on-one coaching, and a world-class community. Learn more and apply to the last cohort of the season at beyonddeck.com/first-50. Joining me in the Deep End this week is Eli Dourado, an economist who says that all he wants is for GDP per capita to reach $200,000 in 2050. My conversation with Eli today centers around how to get economic growth back on track after the Great Stagnation, which was a slowdown of total factor productivity growth from 2% annually in the post-World War II period to 0.3% by 2005. We discussed the causes of economic stagnation and the way to get faster growth, including genuine hard tech advances like the Mrna vaccines or faster air travel. We also talk about why institutional and regulatory changes, what Eli calls social technologies, are just as necessary as pure technological innovation. It's a far-ranging discussion that covers everything from the details of what led to the mothballing of the Concorde project to how it might be possible one day to travel to other sides of the earth on your lunch break. We also discuss why the promiscuous distribution of veto powers has slowed our ability to make decisions as a society, crippling our ability to innovate and achieve our economic growth potential as a result. There's a lot of ground to cover, so without further ado, let's dive in. Eli Dourado, welcome to the Deep End.
Hi, Marshall. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to chat with you. It's funny. I think we last spoke on a recording format at an earlier part of the pandemic, April, May, when we were looking at each other through terrible Zoom things. So audience members should really appreciate the fact that the quality here has really upped a lot. I want to just start with addressing an idea which I found really interesting. This is on your Twitter bio. This is in all of your broader writing. You have a central objective, which is all you want is for the GDP per capita to be 200,000 by 2050. I want to explain what does that mean, like unpack the economics, but then speak to the broader idea, which will then help us set the tone for the conversation.
Sure. Yeah. And let me just say $20, right? So like not I don't want to get there through hyperinflation. So I mean, where to begin on this? So what has motivated me throughout, much of my career is just trying to get growth back on track. So if you look at the macroeconomic data, we were growing pretty fast post-war, like post-World War II, up until about the early 1970s. And then we started to slow down, right? And this is what Tyler Cowen, my PhD advisor, my mentor, has called the Great Stagnation. And so we went from, total factor productivity growth of 2% a year after year after year after year. And then in 1973, it just sort of stopped. It went to about 1% a year. And then We had a little blip in the late 90s, early 2000s, where it started growing at 2% again. And then about 2005, it just fell off a cliff. It's like 0.3% per year since then. So just really, really slow. And so,
and a quick thing, when you say a blip in the 90s, is that the internet? Like, what is that? Because if this is a tech podcast, so like, is that what the folks here were directionally doing?
I don't think it's been fully explained, right? It could be a number of things. I don't think it was like the internet per se. It wasn't the timing doesn't fit. Like 1995, 96 wasn't like a big time. So I think it's important to realize, like, total factor productivity, the needle only moves on it when it becomes a product that actually is used. It's used in production, right? It's not consumer technology, and it's not like, it's got to be at scale, right? It can't just be like an idea, like a scientific breakthrough, or like, starting to penetrate or something. It's got to be like at scale to really move the needle on it. So I don't think it's the internet. Could be trade stuff. Could be like, we started trading with China more, and that enabled us to be more productive for about 10 years. And the Walmart effect, some people think might have been part of it. But it's I think still disputed by a lot of people. And then so then it sort of fell off the cliff, and we had this like horrible like 2010s decade. And so my objective is just to get people to put economic growth front and center in sort of, their political ideas or, their policy preferences. I think if we got TFP back to 2+% a year, maybe you have to go maybe even a little higher to do some catch up. But, you're talking about like GDP per capita growth of around a little over around 4% a year. If we did that from now until 2050, we would get there. And that would be, astounding, right? So you'd have, you can imagine everybody, 3 times richer than we are today. It'd be awesome.
And I think what's interesting here, and this is why it makes sense to be on a tech podcast, is you think hard tech specifically plays a huge role there. So just define hard tech and articulate why this relates to the vision you're describing here.
Yeah. So I basically think it's not going to be just software, right? You can't use only software to get us all the way. So Mark Andreessen saying software is eating the world. I'm not saying he's wrong, but I think we need breakthroughs in the physical world in things like, faster flight, in things like, new kinds of medical treatments that make, the expensive care that we get today completely obsolete. New energy technologies that, enable us to do radically different things in the world, new production methods. All of that's the kind of stuff that I think we need to get there. It's not going to be, better YouTube or Netflix or, entertainment technologies, essentially.
Yeah. And I want to talk about software is eating the world, because this is an interesting time to do it, because, you're on Twitter. I'm sure you're seeing this discourse where everyone's talking about, hey, like hotels are actually cheaper than Airbnbs now. And actually my taxi not only got there quicker, but it was cheaper. So to what degree do these examples, because what I'm referencing the original Software Eating the World essay, where he specifically talked about how software is remaking these legacy, really sort of stuck in the 70s, 80s industries. How do you think those 2010 era innovations play into the growth story of today? And then we'll get to the hard tech part.
Yeah, so you can get some progress from in these physical world stuff from just better software. And I actually believe part of what we need to stimulate the broader economy is for like a lot of old firms to probably die, and for new firms to form up and use the better tools and so on internally and in the design of their product and in the distribution of their product to be more effective. But it doesn't radically change how the service is provided, right? So like Uber is a great example, Uber and Lyft, right? Like great example of software playing a major role in sort of connecting, creating this marketplace. But, you still got to have a human driver, right? Like the leap from slightly better matching of drivers and passengers to you don't need a driver at all. Like the second is a much bigger leap, right? And so we need to sort of have I think more ambitious vision of what's really possible in a lot of these spaces, and it is going to have to go beyond just little software tweaks.
So then, what are examples of hard tech products, or not even products, but just innovations, developments? Once again, to your Twitter project, to your Twitter bio, mega projects. What are examples of things that could move the needle?
Well, I think we had one with mRNA vaccines, right? Like that was such a huge breakthrough to have a vaccine provided in less than a year, when in the past vaccines have taken 25 years to develop, right? And the underlying technology within mRNA and related technologies, because there may be improvements, that can be used for so much more than just like a vaccine against a virus or a pandemic or something like that. It could be used to treat cancer, could be used to treat previously unsolvable diseases, right? And and more generally, like being able to design proteins and put them in the human body and have them behave and function in a way that according to your design, that would be a game changer for medicine, right? So that's like one set of examples. I think around energy, I think we're still thinking kind of too small in terms of trying to, basically replace fossil fuels with like cleaner energies instead of, what energy technologies could we use to scale up the amount of energy available to us by, a factor of 2, 3, 5, 10, and what does that look like? And what would then we be able to do? One area that's near and dear to my heart is faster flight. So, we're still flying around, like idiots at 550 miles an hour. When, we had this plane called the Concorde, and it flew more than twice as fast as that. And, we don't have it anymore. We completely lost it. And we could be flying, we could be getting to our destination in a fraction of the time that we're getting there today. And we would probably, if that technology were widespread and available and we were able to drive the cost down, that we would all travel more, right? We'd see more of the world in our lifetime and go more often. I think you could go sector by sector through the economy, right? Like health, energy, transportation, et cetera. And I think there's so many possibilities that we could do, and we just need to be more ambitious about it.
So speaking of, the supersonic flight, you were with Boom, you led policy there. As I understand it, there have been some real developments in terms of, like, I believe it's United Airlines signing forward-facing contracts. So can you talk? That's just been exciting, because that's an example of a deep tech space where there was a lot of talk for a while, but then there's just this very tangible, at least tangible in the sense of contracts. And so just give us an update on how you sort of assess the space beyond the narrative, which used to be, not saying the narrative isn't innovative, but now it's moved beyond just, hey, it was crazy that the Concorde doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. So the space, there's multiple companies now, right? So Boom is, they're building a Mach 1.7 airliner that will carry something around 60 people. Like you said, they've gotten real customer orders. They announced a manufacturing facility in North Carolina recently. So, and they're talking about, I'm not 100% sure these dates are right, but something like 2025, 2026 for first flight, and something like 2029 for entry into service. So, and then there's another company called Hermeus that they're building a Mach 5 product it's going to be dual use. So there's a military application. So they're sort of going up the scale of, we're going to first build a demonstrator, then we're going to build a product for the military, and then we're going to build an airliner. And they're talking about something like 2030 for entry into service for the airliner as well. And they're Atlanta based. And then there's sort of wilder concepts like Venus Aerospace. I think they're targeting something like Mach 9, and that's more like a rocket where you're not taking off in like an airplane. I think you're landing like an airplane, but not taking off like one. And then there's still like the thing in the back of your mind that you got to be thinking about is like Starship, right? So SpaceX's Starship, there is an idea there of, well, we could use this for transportation around the other side of the globe, and that would basically take you from one side of the Earth, as far as the other side of the Earth, basically anywhere in 45 minutes or to an hour. So you could go, to Singapore for lunch, and then come back. So it's I think it's still anybody's guess as to which of these approaches is going to be the one that wins out, and I'm cheering for basically all of them, and hope they all succeed. But yeah, it is people are actually building hardware now, and it's a really exciting time.
Something I'm curious about, and you hinted at it when you were discussing the idea of price going down over time, is this idea of, in these expensive research, manufacturing intensive processes, how long, and you're not going to give an exact answer because like you said, this is different tech, different industries, but let's talk about the airlines, for example. So for a huge portion of the history of the airline, it was incredibly expensive, right? Like, you see those memes of how nice meals used to be
Sure.
on planes in the legroom, and it's like, well, that happened. That cost money for a reason. That was a different style of travel, but eventually it went down. So can you just talk about the idea of should we think of, at first, it's expensive. At first, it's targeted to the rich, which I'm sure will be a point that critics will point out. How should we think of those dynamics?
Yeah. So and with airlines in particular, it was the Civil Aeronautics Board that actually like limited competition and set fares. And they set the fares so that the airlines would make pretty decent profits. And then the only way that the airlines had to compete was on food, right? So they couldn't compete on price, so they had to compete on food quality. So that's what they competed on. But yeah, these costs, they do get driven way down, right? And the airline industry is a perfect example. Even putting aside that Civil Aeronautics Board issue, because they haven't been competing on speed, they have been competing on price and reliability and things like that, and that has driven the cost down and down and down. And every new airliner that Boeing or Airbus puts out is going to be somewhat more efficient. But yeah, this is the way that all progress tends to happen, is that goods are expensive when they haven't reached scale, right? And they haven't reached a billion users, right? And then they come down in price. Meanwhile, if you look at something like a smartphone, I own the best smartphone in the world, the same smartphone in the world that, like a lot of billionaires own. They can't buy a better smartphone. And it, it's the same, I pay the same price they do, and it's affordable. And that happens because companies are able to reach scale. And so a lot of the, think about something like life extension technologies, right? Like longevity research and stuff. Like people worry about that's gonna be only for the rich. Well, if you're talking about some unapproved therapy that is basically being done by scientists that you have to hire yourself, it's like, yeah, that's going to be only done for the rich. But if you're talking about something that would serve a market need for billions of people, and by the way, the billionaires don't only want a treatment that only they have tested. Like they want like lots of hundreds of other people that have tested it as well. So there's a strong incentive for scale. And so as soon as the good works up that sort of like scale ladder, that just becomes a better good. It becomes it becomes cheaper for everybody, but it becomes better for even the people who could afford to pay a lot more. Just that the fact that it's a mass market product and all the kinks are worked out and so on. So yeah, I think the people who are worried about products being only affordable by the very wealthy, I think they're not really thinking through the sort of history of basically every product that we see on the market today. As soon as it gets to able to address a market of millions of people, the prices come way down.
A thing I want to get to also in the airline example that you gave is if we're looking at the future, right? If we're looking at the next 10 years, you did a great post on your blog about technology in the 2020s, which I'm sure we'll get into. But the airline example you gave brings to mind a question, which is how much of our limits are the result of technology and how much of them are regulatory limits? So to your point, there wasn't a technical reason why airline flights had to be so expensive up until the 70s. That was a regulatory process thing. So, you refer to yourself as a regulatory hacker. So could you just explain just the regulation side of things? I mean, you can't do that in 30 seconds flat, but
sure.
Just that idea. And then we'll get into where you see the delineation between actual, here is something we have not solved, Mac 10 probably hasn't been solved, versus you can't have a Concorde fly in X region. That could be turned with a switch.
Yeah. So one way to think about technology, you can think about technology broadly, right? You can think about as if you have a certain number of inputs, like how much can you get as outputs, right? And if that gets better, then you have better technology, right? And that would, if your definition is that broad, then you have to start thinking about social technology too, institutions, right? If we have better institutions, we will be able to get more outputs with the same number of inputs or with fewer inputs, right? And so to some extent, I think technology and institutions are very closely intertwined, right? That we need better, like pure technology in the sense of, like applied science and so on. But we also need better social technology in the sense of better institutions, better laws, regulations, et cetera, that support being, efficiency and being very productive. And, I think bio is a perfect example. We have seen this like amazing flourishing of biotech research, right? Things like CRISPR that let us, edit the genes of living organisms, right? Like it's amazing. There are no like CRISPR treatments on the market. Like you can't go to the CRISPR store. You can't go to, to the doctor and say, I want to change this gene. Like even if you have, a serious disease, right? That's still not allowed, right? And so why isn't it allowed? It's this other social technology issue where we're really lagging. And I think in particular, one of the things I've really focused on is, to explain the timing of it's the early 1970s when this starts slowing down. I've thought a lot about NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, which institutes, the idea of we got to have environmental reviews before we let any federal agency make basically any decision of consequence, right? And that process has now ballooned. It's years long. So many headaches. I talked to a very innovative startup yesterday, and they're in the midst of this NEPA battle. Not a startup you would normally think has an environmental issue, but they are, they need to get approval for something, and they're in just this NEPA hell where they're not even doing a review yet. They just want an answer of what kind of review do we have to do, right? And it's just this whole layer of slowness and risk and potential vetocracy. And so I think of that as kind of
Can you
the
explain
beginning.
what vetocracy means?
Yeah. So vetocracy is just when we let a lot of people have veto rights over a decision, right? So if um, in this case, you have an environmental review, and if anybody objects to the environmental review, they can, a few $100, they can take the agency to court. They can sue the agency. You shouldn't have approved this. Your environmental analysis was deficient in these ways, and they can get the judge to send it back and say you got to redo the environmental analysis, take another year. And so we just let anybody do that. And I think it's similar things in housing, where you want to sort of change the zoning rules to allow something to happen. And local residents can especially in California, they can file a lawsuit and stop it from happening, or at least delay it significantly. And so when you have that sort of, I think Larry Summers called it promiscuous distribution of veto powers. Right. And so if you have that distribution, then nothing gets done. Right. And that's like a huge chunk of, I think, the problem that we face as a society is that we're not we're not setting up our legal systems and our institutions to be able to just make quick decisions and just move forward. And I think, I would even tolerate some level of like wrong decisions. Right. Like I'd rather have like, some error rate. If we can just get through every decision very quickly, that would be, I think, preferable to the system we have now.
And another thing that I'm wondering about is when you're looking at these spaces, something that I'm sure you've been thinking about for the past few years is just this idea of regulatory competition. So, hey, there's this state, locality, maybe even country that is engaging in and allowing for vetocracy. A more digital world with Zoom, work from home, et cetera, decentralization of Silicon Valley should enable for more regulatory competition. This was an idea even before COVID. How would you assess the state of that idea?
I think it's a mixed bag, right? So, I mean, if you consider, for something I worked on, supersonics, right? Like, we talked to countries, and I'd talk to somebody in here like, oh, Australia would probably let us fly from Sydney to Perth, right? Supersonic over land, right? Like, which is, not what any of these companies are designing for, by the way. They're just designing for supersonic over the ocean. But just thinking about like, what would it take to allow us to fly over land, double the market size, let's say. And I was like, okay, well, Sydney to Perth, that's
sorry, Eli, I don't mean to interrupt, but I realized that we didn't make something clear. The reason why does the overland part matter, and why did that actually cause? Yeah, because people are probably wondering, wait, what's the beef with the Concorde? So what are you referring to?
Well, okay, so supersonic airplanes, when they travel faster than the speed of sound, they sort of continually like emit a shockwave that creates, when that shockwave reaches the ground, it creates a sonic boom, and it's it is loud, can be startling, and if you don't design specifically to soften the boom, which some people are starting to do, and NASA is starting to look into, or has looked into it pretty extensively at this point. It is possible to do it, but you take a performance penalty. So most of the existing companies that are developing supersonic technologies are not developing low boom technologies. They're just, especially given the regulatory risk, because we don't know what are the acceptable levels. And so they're designing just to go over the ocean, just like the Concorde did. And so that's why it's not allowed over land. There is no standard, right? It's literally a speed limit, right? It's like you cannot go faster than the speed of sound over the United States and a lot of other countries. And if we simply set a noise limit, right? Like you can be up to 80 PLDB, or whatever the decibel level that you want to allow, then people would start designing for it, and the market size would double, and it would get a lot more a lot more scale, like we were talking about earlier. It would drive the cost down too. And so apologies for that, but going back to what I was saying before, if you got Australia to allow you to fly overland for like one route, it's not a ton of passengers. It's, you really do need global scale for a lot of these products. Similarly, like if you had like a better regulatory environment for like Apple, right, for their iPhone, like doesn't really move the needle, right? Like they need really like a global marketplace to sell these things. So it depends on the kind of product that you're talking about, right? If you're selling a medical service or something like that, like for medical tourism or something like that, then I think you can really leverage regulatory competition between countries and sort of get these havens where it's allowed for certain financial transactions, like maybe something like that would work. But for a lot of products that are trying to reach a global market, and where you kind of design once and sell that product everywhere on the market, I think it doesn't really work, right? So I don't know where it stands. I think there's countries that are trying to be favorable to crypto or something like that, and maybe that will work. But for a lot of these hard tech things that you really do have to mass manufacture and so on, it doesn't really help you out that much.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So then for this last section, I want to look at this from two different perspectives. So let's start from the policy making perspective. So like you just made clear with the sound limit in the United States, there's a specific limit that maybe a fine policy, but like at a core level is probably affecting markets in a way that I don't think any regulator is quite aware of when you make a decision like that. So what would be your advice for regulators who, and I think this is why it's important that you have a background in the policy space, you understand that it's not just that regulators are, Luddites who hate technology, they have to balance things. So a regulator who's responsible to a politician has to balance the fact that the people who live around LaGuardia or JFK Airport, they don't care about any single thing that you said. Here, they just care about the fact that there's sound. So what you're trying to do is like balance. So there's never going to be a world where regulators are going to say to themselves, our number one objective is to get to maximum technological progress at, 100% throttle. So how would you help them? But that being said, I think we can agree that the throttle's pulled back way too far.
Right.
How do you advise you get to that fair zone?
That's a good question. I think in aviation there already is. There's a lot of for a lot of things. There's a pretty good setup, right? Which is that for these issues like noise, like takeoff noise, right? Which is different than sonic boom noise, right? The way that the law is written by Congress is that FAA is supposed to design standards according to the capabilities of like the best airplanes on the market, right? They're not allowed to like set standards that nobody can attain, right? And so basically every few years, like they take a look at how loud the planes are and say what the late model planes are, and they say, okay, from now on, like nobody can be louder than these planes. And so there's like a ratchet that the sort of the takeoff noise standards get better over time based on what the industry is actually able to achieve. And part of the reason for that is also that you don't want to improve environmental quality at the expense of safety, right? So there's a decision made that like we're going to put safety first, and then so make them be as safe as possible, and then we'll see where the noise shakes out, and don't make them sort of like push the envelope on noise to and with maybe a detrimental effect on safety. And so that works. And what the problem is with supersonics is that we sort of like skipped that system entirely with the overland ban, which was imposed in 1973 basically as a reaction to the failed U.S. supersonic program, right? The Concorde was British and French, and the U.S. had a program that is, partially government funded and, developed by Boeing. And sort of like when that program started to spiral out of control and sort of was eventually cut by Congress, that's when we started talking about, we need to ban supersonic flight over land.
What do you mean by, so what does spiral out of control mean?
Well, the design was just kind of nuts. they were trying to make it better than Concorde, essentially, with technology that probably wasn't ready for prime time. So I think they wanted to go like Mach 2.7 instead of Mach 2.0, which is what Concorde did. So aluminum can't go much past Mach 2.0, or like gets too soggy, right? There's like too much friction in the air, and the heat makes it sort of fall apart. And so they were gonna like switch to titanium for the American one, and that's much harder to machine. It's much harder to make into like the flowing aerodynamic shapes that you need. And then I think the other thing was they were going to make it like much bigger in terms of number of passengers. So the whole thing was just like very expensive to manufacture, and like the engines like weren't ready for, I think, that, the amount of going faster and with, and carrying a lot more mass, right? A lot more people, and ultimately more fuel and all that stuff. So it was like poorly designed. I think some of those points were like politically chosen, right? Not chosen by engineers. It was like, okay, we got to be faster and we got to be bigger. And so the ban was put in place after that program failed, basically as a way to like limit the French and British aerospace program, right? Like, and prior to the, about that time, prior to like 1971 or so, like the U.S. government was like very pro like sonic boom. They were doing all these tests of like how loud of a sonic boom could people tolerate and was acceptable. And we have all that data now, and it's pretty interesting. And I've looked at all of it. But yeah, then we went to a full ban, and then now to like repeal the ban and even put in a temporary standard, right? You'd have to go through NEPA review, right? Like the FAA would have to do it. They would absolutely get sued about it, no matter what they said, because NEPA does open them up to lawsuits. There's data being collected now by NASA, or in the next couple of years. They're building a plane that can do a low boom flight. And then they're going to collect the data and use that to maybe inform a future rulemaking. But what I think we need to get back to is the idea of like, well, let's just see how loud these planes how quiet they can be, right? And build the standard based on that. And for that, you need the planes to actually exist. And nobody wants to invest in the plane unless there's, like, you don't want to invest billions of dollars to make a plane and then be hurt, have the FAA tell you it's too loud by like a decibel or two. So it's a real chicken and the egg problem with supersonic airplanes. And I think that the right approach here is to just get something on the market that is allowed to fly over land. And maybe it's even, if it's too loud, maybe it's only allowed during daytime or something like that, right? Because if you're flying fast, you don't need to do these red eyes, certainly not domestic red eyes. And so get something on the market and then set the standard based on whatever that is, and then have it ratchet down over time, the way we have done with takeoff and landing noise. So that's I think the right like sort of way to thread the needle of like, yeah, there are legitimate issues here, but we also need to move forward.
So the audience, because this is an on deck podcast, the audience for this podcast is founders, folks who want to work in early stage companies or want to actually found a company themselves. What would your advice be if they are the type of person who's very interested in this hard tech space? Let's say specifically, you want to found a company. What's the background? What's the experience? How does, being technical fit into it? Like, what's your advice just for people who want to go next level on just these hard tech issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, read a lot, right? Read a lot of, science and engineering and books about like, understand like what's actually possible. Talk to a lot of people, right? Like go, there are some amazing people in the world that know a lot about, supersonics or, biotech or whatever it is that you want to do, and just sort of like collect, information, make a model of the world in your head of like how this would work, and then at some point you've got to take the plunge, and like there's never been a better time in terms of there's a lot of capital out there, so to sort of fund these really ambitious ideas. And so I do think like we need more of that, and then and then go crush the legacy industry, right? Like that's what we need to grow, is to sort of companies that exist today, the big companies, the legacy companies, they're not going to like change, right? Like it's so hard to like move these, to sort of like overhaul and have renewal within existing companies. And it's the only way we're going to progress is if we come up with something better and let the old guard fail.
So then for the last question, and this is more of a meta question because you've been in the space for a while. I was at Miami Tech Week, and during the section of the Friday event on space, so you had a lot of the usual suspects there, the reference was made to, I want to work on this is one of the CEOs, like, I want to work on hard problems. I don't want to do silly advertising stuff that doesn't really matter. And everyone cheered. As a narrative person, what I just noted is like, okay, 10 years ago, it was a hot take to say everything that you're saying. But when a CEO says that point and the whole room cheers, this doesn't mean it's not incorrect. It's just that this is no longer a heretical, crazy view. It'd actually be heretical to actually say, I think advertising is the most important thing in the world. That's where I'm going to focus all my attention. So if someone holds that opinion, please come on the podcast. But now that we're basically at the stage where this is conventional wisdom, just what's next, right? Like, what is, so it feels as if your perspective has won the narrative battle within tech. What do you see as the next important stage here? Because would that be the funding battle, right? So it's like, okay, you all agree that hard stuff is cool. You all want to be like Elon Musk, but you need to also fund our companies. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so funding is really challenging because the timelines on these projects are longer, right? So if I'm, starting a software as a service company, I might be able to like pitch investors on, you're going to get your money back in like 3 years, right? And a lot more, right? And so if you're building, something in space or something in aerospace or, even health or whatever, you're talking like a decade or more before the money returns. And so that's in that sense, like hard tech is always going to be at a disadvantage against software. Now that said, like what are the advantages, the sort of offsetting advantages? And so one is you're not competing against a bunch of companies just like you, right? So if you're doing a software as a service thing, like you have to compete against like the guy down the road who's building like the exact same product, and like you've got to do it better than what he's doing. Whereas if you're in hard tech, like you might be the only one, the only company that's doing this thing, and then it's your fate is purely in your own hands, right? Like it's you. If it works, like, your company wins, it takes over the whole market and like you're a billionaire. And if it doesn't, then okay, then you had a good learning experience. But like, there's no in between. There's no like, oh, the product worked and like nobody wanted it. And, like, or like it was just like 10% worse than the competitors and so on. So like, I think it's different kinds of risks. And then I think the other advantage that you have if you're building in hard tech is, like you said, like a lot of people want to go work on these kinds of things. They don't want to chase ad clicks. And, being able to sort of leverage that for hiring and just, I think much more broadly than just sort of like employees and hiring, people want to help you. People will come out of the woodwork to help you. All the time I talk to startups who are like no formal advising relationship, but like they have a question about, something NEPA related or whatever. And like, I talk to them all the time. Right. And like, I want to help them and I'm cheering for them. And so you get that kind of benefit that, you wouldn't get if you're just like a software company. So I think that, you're like I said, it's like a trade-off, right? It's like you have that worse one sort of like timeline issue in terms that it does affect fundraising, and it does make it hard. But on every other margin, I think you have something that's more beneficial. And I would say also, like, just getting up in the morning and like being excited to go to work. Like if you're, again, chasing ad clicks or whatever, like staying motivated as a founder is like incredibly important, because it's a multi-year slog. And if you're not excited about it, you're probably not going to perform at your best.
Really well said. Eli, thank you so much for joining us. The last actual question would be, you said that folks need to, double down and read a bit. So just can you shout out a couple useful books, articles, blog posts that folks should listen to after this episode?
I don't think that there's like one thing that everybody should read, right? Like I think if it's domain specific, right? So I'll give an example of like there was I wrote an article like a couple years ago on the editor wanted like something on space mega projects, and I was like, okay, cool. And so I said I would do it, and then I got a book on radio astronomy, right? And it's like a academic book called The Invisible Universe, and like I'm guessing it did not sell very well, right? It was like taught you like the basics of radio astronomy, like all the way up to like some more advanced stuff. And I found the book like free online, right? Like probably like 50 people had read it before ever, and it was great. And I learned a ton from just sitting down and reading it and plugging away. I would say like what Blake Scholl, the founder of Boom, would say is like, he didn't have a background in aircraft design or any sort of aerospace engineering before he founded Boom, but like he actually like read an airplane design book, right? And he did an airplane design course, right? And like you can do that. Like you have that is within the power of anybody to like sit down and read a book and teach themselves a subject. So you absolutely should do that if you are interested in one of these areas.
Excellent. Great advice. Once again, thank you for joining us in the deep end.
Thanks for having me, Marshall.